I hadn't seen her in almost 4 years. That thought hit me the moment I stepped out of my car and looked up at the house. The same porch swing still hung from the left beam, only now it squeaked when the wind moved it. The lawn looked familiar, but more grown in, like it hadn't been trimmed in a while. And the flower beds, once vibrant, were now full of weeds and tired blooms. Still, it felt the same. Still, it felt like her. I wasn't supposed to stay here. My original plan was to crash at a cheap motel near campus before driving further north to start my summer internship. But when my best friend Ethan heard I was coming through town, he insisted I stop by, just for a night or two. His mom, Olivia, wouldn't mind. He said she'd probably be happy to see me. That sentence stuck in my head as I grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk. I walked up the porch steps with a strange mix of hesitation and nostalgia. This place had once felt like a second home. I'd spent more nights here during high school than I did in my own room. Sleepovers, movie nights, pizza on Fridays. Olivia was always the calm presence in the background, making sure we had snacks, checking in with a soft knock before bed, asking if we needed anything. Back then, she was just Ethan's mom. Beautiful, yes, people always said that, but off limits, distant, untouchable. I rang the doorbell. The door opened faster than I expected, and there she was. Her hair was shorter now, cut to her shoulders, and her features seemed even sharper, more defined than I remembered. But her eyes were the same, deep hazel, soft around the edges, observant. She looked at me for a moment like she couldn't quite believe it. "Wow," she said finally, her voice lower than I remembered. "You've grown up." I gave a small, awkward laugh, unsure. "Hi, Olivia." She stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. She still smelled the same, something floral and faintly citrusy. For a second, I let myself relax into it. Come in," she said, pulling back. "Ethan's not home yet, but he said you'd be here around this time." I stepped inside. The house was warmer than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feel. The same wooden floors, the same framed photos along the hallway, Ethan's awkward school pictures, one of their family at the lake, and I noticed with a blink one of me and Ethan from senior year. "You've done some redecorating," I said, nodding toward the living room. The furniture had changed, sleeker now, less cluttered. She smiled faintly. "After the divorce, I needed a change." I froze slightly at the word, unsure if I was supposed to respond. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "It's okay," she said quickly, waving it off. "It's been over a year now. We're good." There was a pause. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, not yet, but it hung there for just a second too long. "Well," she said, breaking it, "you're taller, and you look different, in a good way." I smiled, rubbing the back of my neck. "I guess college does that." She nodded. "Ethan's been bragging about you. You're headed to Boston after this, right?" "Yeah. Internship at a marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it's a start." She led me into the living room, gesturing to the couch. I sat down and she followed, perching on the armrest of a nearby chair. "I'm proud of you," she said. I blinked. "You barely know what I've been doing." She tilted her head. "I've heard enough, and I remember who you were. Responsible, kind, a little quiet." I chuckled. "Still quiet. Not a bad thing," she said. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, and I glanced away, suddenly hyper-aware of her presence. "You must be tired," she said, standing. "I made up the guest room, same one you always used. You remember where it is?" "Yeah, thanks, Olivia." She smiled again. "You don't have to call me that. You know, you always used to just say Liv." I nodded, unsure if I should go back to that, but she had already started up the stairs. I sat alone in the living room for a while, letting the memories flood back. The laughter, the late nights, the sense of safety I'd always felt in this house. But now something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was her. Or maybe it was that look in her eyes when she said I'd grown up. Ethan arrived later, loud and full of energy, just like always. We caught up over dinner, burgers and salad Olivia made, while we sat around the kitchen island. She asked questions, listened, laughed at our dumb stories. But every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at me, a flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't there before, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't glance back. The next day felt like a time capsule cracked open. Ethan had plans in the morning, something about catching up with his girlfriend, who I vaguely remembered from school. He said he'd be out for a few hours, maybe all day, and offered to drop me off somewhere or let me borrow his car. I declined. I didn't have anywhere to be. And truthfully, part of me didn't want to leave the house just yet. When he left, the house felt strangely quiet, peaceful, but with something humming underneath. Olivia was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she sorted through a stack of mail. She wore a soft beige sweater, slightly oversized with sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her hair was loosely tied back, casual but still striking. "You hungry?" she asked without looking up. "A little," I admitted. She opened the fridge. "There's leftover lasagna from last night. Want me to heat some up?" "I can do it." She glanced at me. "You sure?" I smiled. "I'm not a total mess, Liv." Her eyes lingered on me for a second at the sound of that name, as if she was surprised I'd actually said it. Then she smiled, slow and a little soft at the edges. "Well, good to know you've learned to use a microwave." I joined her in the kitchen and started reheating the lasagna. We moved around each other in a comfortable rhythm, occasionally brushing past or reaching for the same drawer. It was domestic in the strangest, most natural way. I felt oddly at home in her space, more so than I had in years. When I sat down at the kitchen table, she leaned against the counter, watching me eat, like she had something else on her mind. "Do you remember the time you and Ethan broke the garden hose and tried to fix it with duct tape?" she asked suddenly. I laughed through a bite. "Yeah, it exploded in our faces like a geyser. You were so worried I'd be mad. You kept trying to fix it before I noticed." "I was terrified," I grinned. "You always had this look when you were disappointed. I hated that look." She raised an eyebrow. "I was never mad. Just impressed you tried to fix it before I got home." I chewed quietly for a moment. "You were always calm. I think that's why I liked being here so much. Everything at my house was louder." She looked at me, not saying anything for a beat. "You were a good kid," she said. "Polite, gentle." "I'm not sure I'd use gentle," I smirked. She didn't laugh, just stared at me with an unreadable expression. Then, changing the subject, she asked, "You still play guitar?" I nodded. "A little, not as much since college." "Why?" "I found your old one. It's in the hall closet." I blinked. "You kept it?" "Well," she said, looking slightly amused, "you said you'd come back for it someday, so I waited. That was 4 years ago. And now you're here." Her words hung in the air between us. I wasn't sure if it was meant to be casual, but something about the way she said it felt heavier, more deliberate. She moved to rinse a cup in the sink, and I stood to put my plate away. As I stepped beside her, I caught a glimpse of her profile, graceful, calm. Her skin had a faint glow in the sunlight streaming through the window. She turned her head slightly toward me, and for a second, our eyes met at close range. Neither of us moved. Then she broke the silence with a quiet, "It's good to have you here." I swallowed. "It's good to be back." Later that afternoon, we ended up in the backyard. The grass was uneven, but still soft underfoot. I helped her carry out a basket of clean laundry to hang on the line. "This feels old school," I joked, reaching for a clothespin. She smiled without looking at me. "Some habits die hard." We talked as we worked, about music, books, the neighborhood, how things had changed. I noticed how often she laughed, how easily we drifted from subject to subject, how when she passed a shirt to me, her fingers brushed mine, and she didn't pull away immediately. It wasn't flirtatious, not exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. That night after Ethan got back and we ordered takeout, I noticed something strange. While we all sat around watching an old movie, Olivia didn't look at me once. Not like before. Her attention was entirely elsewhere. On the screen, on her son, on her food. It unsettled me more than I cared to admit. When the movie ended, Ethan yawned and said he was heading out again to meet his girlfriend. "You sure you're good here?" he asked me. "Yeah, I'm fine." He looked at his mom. "Don't keep him up too late talking about recipes or whatever." She smiled without replying. He left, and then it was just the two of us again. Olivia stood to collect the plates. "You don't have to help," she said over her shoulder. "I don't mind." In the kitchen, I rinsed the dishes while she dried. We worked in silence for a while until she spoke, barely above a whisper. "You're different now." I paused. "How do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "You're not a kid anymore." Her words stirred something low in my chest. I turned to face her, heart suddenly thudding louder than it should have. "I guess I'm not," I said. Her eyes searched mine for a moment. Then she smiled faintly. Not dismissive, not playful, just aware. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything," she said, turning away. As she walked toward the hallway, I found myself staring after her longer than I should have. And I knew then something between us had shifted. The next morning passed in a blur of sunlight and stillness. Ethan had left early again. I barely heard the front door close before drifting back to sleep. By the time I got out of bed and made my way downstairs, Olivia was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee in a white linen shirt and soft gray lounge pants. Her hair was down and slightly tousled. She looked like she hadn't been awake long either. "Morning," she said, barely turning her head. "Morning," I replied, voice still groggy. "Coffee, please." She poured me a cup and slid it across the counter. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us staring out the window above the sink. A few birds fluttered in the trees and the faint sound of a lawnmower echoed from somewhere down the street. "Ethan said he'd be gone most of the day," she said after a sip. "Yeah, he mentioned something about helping his girlfriend's family move." She nodded, almost like she was confirming it to herself. "You've got the house to yourself again." "Not entirely," I said, and immediately wondered if it sounded too direct. She raised an eyebrow, half amused. "No, not entirely." I took a drink of my coffee, avoiding her eyes, but I could feel her looking at me. Not in the casual way people do when making small talk, but in that quiet, observant way that made your skin warm and your thoughts stumble. After breakfast, she asked if I could help her bring a few things down from the attic. I followed her up the narrow stairs into the musty heat of the top floor. The attic hadn't changed much, still filled with old boxes, forgotten furniture, and random holiday decorations. Dust floated in the air, made visible by streaks of light coming through a small window. We moved a few boxes together, organizing them by the door. At one point, she bent down to shift a stack, and I instinctively reached to help, my hand brushing hers. She looked up at me just for a second, but there was something different in the way she held my gaze. No embarrassment, no retreat. We didn't speak. Eventually she stood, brushing dust off her hands, and said, "Thanks, that would have taken me all day alone." "No problem," I said, trying to sound casual. "Happy to help." We stood there for a beat too long. The heat in the attic wasn't just from the weather. "Let's get out of this oven," she said. Back downstairs, the day moved slow. We didn't do much. Read, listened to music in the living room, made lunch together. Everything felt strangely effortless, like we had done this 100 times before. But underneath, I felt a hum of electricity I couldn't ignore. In the late afternoon, it started to rain. Not a storm, just a quiet, steady downpour that made the world feel small and suspended. Olivia lit a candle on the coffee table and pulled a blanket over her legs as she sat on the couch. I sat nearby, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to notice how close we were. The room smelled like vanilla and rain-soaked grass. The low sound of the music filled the gaps in conversation. "Do you remember when you and Ethan got caught sneaking beer into the basement?" she asked out of nowhere. I laughed. "How could I forget? You grounded us both." She smirked. "I grounded Ethan. You just got a lecture." "That lecture lasted forever," I said. "And you listened," she said almost fondly. "You always listened." I looked at her, and something about the way she said it, the softness in her voice, made my chest feel tight. "You were always more grown up than the other boys," she said, "even when you weren't." "I guess I had to be," I said, and I wasn't entirely sure what I meant. She turned to face me, one leg tucked under the other, her eyes steady on mine. "And now?" she asked. "What do you mean now that you are grown?" Her question was gentle, but it hung there like a challenge. I hesitated, then said, "Now I just pretend better." She smiled faintly. "Don't we all?" We stayed there for a while in silence. the air between us thick with things unspoken. Her hand was resting on the cushion, just a few inches from mine. I could feel the heat of it, the distance, the tension, but neither of us moved. That evening, Ethan texted to say he'd be staying over at his girlfriend's place. Something about helping them finish packing and an early morning drive. Olivia showed me the text, then locked her phone without comment. Dinner was quiet but not cold. We talked, joked, sipped wine slowly. She asked more about my internship, about the kind of work I wanted to do. I told her I wasn't sure yet, that I felt like I was just now starting to figure myself out. "You'll be fine," she said softly. "You always find your way." After we cleared the table, she stood with her hands on the back of a chair and looked at me. Not past me, not through me, but at me. "You're not the same boy who used to sleep down the hall," she said. I didn't respond. She held my gaze for another second, then said, "I'm going to take a shower." And just like that, she disappeared up the stairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with a pulse that refused to slow down. I sat there for a while, staring at the candle on the table, listening to the soft sound of the rain still tapping against the windows. I wasn't sure what was happening or what would happen next, but I knew without a doubt that this wasn't just nostalgia. This was new. This was real, and it was only just beginning. I couldn't sleep, not because of noise, not because I wasn't tired, but because everything felt too still, too quiet. My thoughts circled like water around a drain, slow and constant. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening. At first I thought the sound was in my head, a creak of wood, a floorboard shifting. But then I heard it again, soft footsteps just outside the door. I sat up. The hallway light spilled faintly under the doorframe. Then came a knock, so gentle it could have been imagined. I stood and opened the door. She was there, still in the same gray lounge pants, but now wearing a black zip-up hoodie. Her hair was damp. She had showered, just like she said. There was no makeup on her face, only clean skin and eyes that didn't look away. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked. My throat tightened. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, her hands in the front pockets of her hoodie. She didn't sit, didn't touch anything, just stood near the bed and looked around as if trying to remember something. "I used to come in here after you left," she said, her voice low. "Just to make the bed, open a window. It always smelled like you." I wasn't sure how to respond. She turned to face me. "I didn't know how much I missed having someone like you around until you were gone." Her words weren't rehearsed. They came out carefully, honestly, each one dropping between us like a stone in water. "I thought about you a lot," she added, "more than I probably should have." My heart thudded against my chest. She took a small step closer. "I keep telling myself you're still the kid who used to fall asleep on this bed with your shoes on and a controller in your hand." She looked down and then back at me. "But you're not a kid anymore." And with that, she reached behind her and closed the bedroom door. The sound was soft, final. I didn't move, couldn't. My body felt locked in place while my mind screamed and spun. She stood there in front of the closed door, her fingers still on the knob. Then slowly she let go and stepped closer. "You can tell me to leave," she said. "Right now I'll walk out and never mention this again." I didn't say anything. Her voice lowered. "But if you don't," she took another step, now only a foot away. Her presence filled the room like heat. "I don't want to pretend I don't feel this," she said. "Do you?" I shook my head. "No," I breathed. "I don't." She exhaled, a quiet relief behind it. Then she reached up, her fingers gently brushing the side of my face, barely touching, but enough to make my skin erupt in chills. "I don't know where this goes," she said, "but I need to know I'm not imagining it." "You're not," I said. And just like that, the space between us disappeared. Her kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was slow and deliberate, like she'd been holding it in for years. My hands found her waist, steadying us both. Everything I tried not to feel since I walked into this house came pouring out in that moment. Not just attraction, not just desire, but something deeper. Recognition. We sat down on the edge of the bed. The room was still except for the rhythm of our breaths and the faint sound of rain against the window. She looked at me. "Are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything, I said. She didn't respond with words. She simply leaned in again. The rest of the night blurred into warmth and closeness, not hurried, not careless. There were no expectations, no roles to play, just two people meeting in the middle of something they hadn't planned, something that had quietly been growing for years. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up briefly to find her asleep beside me, her hand resting gently on my chest. I stared at the ceiling, the dark shapes of furniture surrounding us. I should have felt conflicted. I didn't. I felt calm for once. Everything made sense. I woke up before her. Soft morning light filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting long lines across the ceiling. The house was silent. No distant car engines, no creaking pipes, just the quiet of early morning, heavy with the weight of what had happened. She was still beside me, asleep on her side, facing me. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, one arm curled loosely beneath her head, the other resting gently across the blanket that covered us both. Her face was peaceful, vulnerable even. I watched her for a moment, my chest tight with something I couldn't fully name. This wasn't just adrenaline or guilt or some late-night mistake. It had been real, thoughtful, intentional, and yet I didn't know what came next. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and padded quietly into the hallway. The bathroom mirror showed a face I wasn't sure I recognized. Same features, same eyes, but different, older somehow. When I came back to the room, she was awake, sitting up, the covers pulled around her expression unreadable. For a long second, we just looked at each other. Then she spoke. "Hey," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to wake up next to you." "I didn't expect to fall asleep next to you," I replied. That made her smile faintly, but then it faded. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said honestly. "Are you?" She nodded. "I just don't know what happens now." Neither did I. I sat beside her again, unsure whether I should reach for her, unsure whether last night belonged to the present or only to the past. She looked down at the bed for a moment, then said, "I didn't plan for this. I didn't even think I was capable of feeling that way again." "What way?" "Alive," she said simply. That stopped me. "You've been gone a long time," she continued, "and when you came back, it was like something lit up in me again." I swallowed. I felt it too. She looked at me again. No games, no masks. "I don't regret it," she said, "but I'm scared of what this means, of what people would think, of Ethan finding out, of losing this moment if we try to stretch it into something it's not." Her honesty was almost disarming. There was no drama in her voice, only truth and vulnerability. "I don't need to define it right now," I said, "but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen either." She leaned her head slightly toward mine. "You're different than I thought you'd be." "In a bad way?" "In a way that scares me," she admitted. I smiled gently. "Then we're even." We stayed there for a while, not speaking. Eventually we got dressed. She pulled her hair back into a loose bun and moved with practiced calm, like she was trying not to let anything show. But I noticed the small glances, the quiet moments where her eyes lingered a beat longer than necessary. Downstairs, she made coffee. I helped. It was almost absurd how normal it felt. The two of us in a quiet kitchen, exchanging glances over mugs and spoons, like nothing had changed except everything had. Around noon, Ethan texted. He'd be back soon. Olivia set her phone on the counter and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think we made a mistake?" "No," I said. "Do you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer and rested a hand on my chest. "I don't want to regret it," she whispered, "but I'm afraid of what comes next." "I don't expect anything from you," I said. "Except honesty." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll be honest. Last night wasn't just a moment for me. It meant something. It still means something." "Then let's not lose it." She looked at me for a long time, then leaned in and kissed me. Slow, quiet, not full of hunger like the night before, but full of something deeper. And then, just as gently, she pulled back. "We'll figure it out," she said. I believed her. The hours before Ethan returned felt like borrowed time, space we weren't supposed to have, space that wasn't entirely ours. Olivia and I didn't speak much. We didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding between us now, fragile but undeniable. I spent some time on the porch while she cleaned up in the kitchen. It was warm out, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and jasmine from the bush near the steps. Every once in a while, I heard her footsteps inside, the faint clink of a glass or the soft creak of a cabinet. When she came outside, she handed me a cold glass of lemonade, just like she used to when we were kids, except now everything felt different. "You always did like the porch," she said, sitting beside me on the wicker bench. "I used to sit out here and imagine what it would be like to be older, to leave, to come back. And now that you have," I thought for a moment. "Now I realize coming back feels more complicated than I imagined." She smiled gently. "Yeah, it usually does." A car passed by, then silence again. "I don't regret anything," I said suddenly. She turned her head toward me but didn't speak. "Last night," I continued, "this morning I'm not going to treat it like a mistake." "I'm glad," she said, "because I don't think I could have handled it if you had." We sat in that silence a while longer. Then the buzz of a text broke it. Olivia reached for her phone. "He's 20 minutes out," she said softly. And just like that, reality closed in. The house felt tighter, the porch smaller, the air heavier. We went inside together, and without speaking, we both began to shift back into safer roles. She put away the second glass. I fixed the cushions on the couch. It was almost muscle memory, this retreat into the ordinary. By the time Ethan walked through the front door, the house looked exactly like it always had. "Hey," he said, dropping his backpack by the stairs. "Man, it is hot out." I stood up and greeted him with a grin that felt only half real. "Long day, brutal, but it's done. They're officially moved in." He flopped down on the couch and turned on the TV. Olivia entered from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom." No one looked twice. Nothing about us raised alarm bells, but I noticed the way she didn't sit beside him, how she stood behind the couch, how her eyes met mine only once and briefly. Later that evening, we had dinner together, the three of us. The conversation was easy, filled with stories, laughter, even teasing. If there was any tension, Ethan didn't notice. But I noticed everything. The way she refilled my glass without asking. The way our fingers nearly brushed when she passed me a dish. The way she smiled at something I said and then looked down, suddenly self-conscious. After dinner, Ethan suggested we go out the next day. A beach trip maybe, or a hike. "Could be fun," I said, glancing at Olivia. She didn't say anything, just nodded slightly as if to say, "Whatever happens next, we'll handle it." That night, after Ethan went to bed, I stood in the hallway outside my guest room. I wasn't sure if I should knock on her door, if I even should want to, but I didn't need to. Her door opened quietly just a few inches. She stood there in the dim light, robe wrapped around her, eyes soft. "We're okay," she whispered. "I know," I said. And then she closed the door again. Gently this time, like a promise instead of a goodbye. I went to bed feeling something I hadn't expected when I first showed up at this house. Not confusion, not guilt, but peace. What happened between us hadn't been planned. It wasn't neat or easy, but it was real. And sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that change us forever. In the soft creak of a porch swing, in the quiet glow of a candlelit room, the story of Olivia and me reveals a profound life lesson. Sometimes the most transformative connections come when we embrace vulnerability in unexpected moments. Olivia's courage to step beyond her role as a mother, to admit she felt alive again, and my choice to meet her honesty with my own, show that true connection requires seeing someone as they are, not as the world defines them. Her words, "You're not a kid anymore," and the gentle closing of the bedroom door marked a shift, not just in our bond, but in understanding that life's deepest moments often arise in the spaces we least expect. Yet this story also carries a weighty truth. Such connections, while beautiful, are fragile, tangled in the risks of hurting those we care about, like Ethan. It teaches us to cherish authentic moments but tread carefully, honoring both our hearts and our responsibilities. We've all felt that pull, a spark that feels right but challenges the boundaries of our lives. Olivia and I found peace in the unspoken, but it reminds us to weigh what we gain against what we might lose. Have you ever faced a moment where your heart led you somewhere unexpected? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you navigated those delicate truths. If this story stirred something in you, hit subscribe and join our community for more tales that capture the raw, beautiful complexity of human connection.